Hello, my name is Aisha Lai. I'm a filmmaker and a member of the Reframe Film Festival Program Advisory Committee, and it's my great pleasure to welcome the filmmakers behind the wonderful film you just saw, Standing Above the Clouds. Jalena Keane-Lee and Pua Case are joining us from Hawaii for this virtual question and answer session. Thank you both so much for being here.
Aloha, thank you for having us.
Aloha.
So to start out, I was wondering if you could just give us a little update on the 30-meter telescope. Auntie Pua, maybe if you're comfortable answering this, can you tell us what's happened in the time since filming wrapped up?
Well, let me begin by saying that this stands for to protect Mauna Kea, and the building of the 30-meter telescope began for us in 2011. And until this very moment, there has been absolutely no construction that has occurred on the northern plateau of our sacred mountain. At this moment, we are in a situation where the National Science Foundation is determining which of two telescopes they're going to fund because the 30-meter telescope does not have enough funding to complete construction and or decommission after the use of the construction is over. I mean, the use of the telescope is over. So right now we're standing strong to say that the TMT, being 18 stories, will never be built on our mountain, although there are strategies by the other side to change our minds, as happens with all communities, especially indigenous and native communities, where a corporation, an institution, a developer will come in and truly believe that they are able to change your mind, be it by some kind of funding, some kind of educational commitment, monies and promises. So for us, it's a time this year to really stand strong and united and ensure that our Mauna will always be protected. There's also one funder one partner that is no longer involved, which is China. So right now there are four partners, including Canada, that are spearheading this campaign and this effort to build on Mauna Kea.
That's very heartening to hear. I know Canada has such a long and intense history and present moment of investing in colonial projects, both on our territory and afar. It's heartening to hear that there's this. I don't know if you can call it a success story yet, but this victory that it's you've cost them so much money that it's putting the whole thing in question. Um, I wondered if you wanted to speak to any of that we have an active movement here in Ontario and in Canada in terms of Indigenous rights and fighting for the land. Did you want to speak to any of the folks maybe in the audience now who do some of that work?
Well, what I'd like to do is really sincerely thank all of the individuals, the organizations, the Aloha Aina, we call them, whether you call it an activist or um, one who stands as strong as a mountain, unshakable is the term that we use. But there has been so much support and alliances made, relationships established throughout the year between our people and those in your lands that an expression of gratitude is certainly necessary. And personally, I'll just say that especially the Idle No More movement there is very dear to my heart. And if you follow our story of how we started standing for the mountain, when I was very afraid to begin standing for Mauna Kea for very many reasons here in our community, it was the Idle No More movement that I saw on Facebook that really helped me to crawl to courage at that time, and that was at its very beginnings and at mine. So I'm very grateful to all of those who have reached out from your lands to our lands, and that we are still standing together.
That's wonderful. And we're so grateful that you've shared your story and shared this wonderful film with us. I wanted to speak next to Jalena. I wonder if you could take us through some of your filming process and can you talk a bit about like how you approach this documentary? And I think in particular, I was interested in some of your interview techniques or some of the like ways that you got some of the um, dialogue between some of the folks in this film. Like, were you interviewing them? Were you just kind of fly on the wall? Like, what was that like for you?
Thank you so much for asking that. So the film was made over 7 years, so a very long process. And as time went on, I think our Pilina, or our relationship with each other, grew deeper. So I think that shows in the footage. And, a few years in, we're able to get things that were a lot more intimate and kind of some of that more fly on the wall type of footage. And I think when we first started, it was some, initial kind of more traditional sit down interviews, and then also filming some ceremonies and different cultural practices. And a lot of times those are not meant to be filmed. So it was special permission that we received to film certain events. And we had a very collaborative process throughout the whole making of the film. And, I think all stories are very sensitive and very particular and unique, but especially something about a movement that's very like culturally relevant and culturally sensitive that documents cultural practices that maybe some have never been recorded before, not recorded very often. We wanted to make sure that we were, working as a team together, and wanting people to have access to see and witness like cultural revival and these practices being used in real time and also being brought back and created in real time too. So yeah, it was a combination of some sit down interviews. Um, I had to learn through the process of filming to stop talking as much myself, because in the beginning there would be a lot of like talking between on camera and off camera. And then as we were in editing, I was like, oh my gosh, I wish sometimes I was not talking. So kind of becoming a bit more of a fly on the wall as the time went on. But I think a lot of the interviews, like people are talking to me as someone that's kind of like a sister that they, have a lot of aloha for. And so I think that's something that I really like about the style of the film, that we're bringing the audience in as kind of like a younger sister, or someone who is being taught about a lot of the stuff that's going on, but in a lot of intimate spaces, like being inside your van on the front line, or in a tent as you're doing makeup, or in your room, and all those kind of spaces that news cameras or other kind of cameras wouldn't be let into.
Absolutely. And that really comes through. It does feel like a very, very intimate film within the context. And I think you also bring this in your use of clips and archival footage in a really interesting way, where there's this contrast between this almost sister-like way that people are treating you with like, we zoom out and we see like a reporter reporting on the same events kind of thing. And we can see that contrast of like, what's it like to be part of the community versus reporting on the community. Um, can you take us through some of the editing process of the film? Like, how did it come together? Were there any guiding principles that like helped you make sense of all of this footage you got? Because filmed over 6, 7 years, that's like terabytes of footage. So how did you
Yes.
organize that and bring it together?
Quite a process. Filmed over 6, 7 years, but in the film it documents about a decade, and there is so much different archival, and some of it was archival from incredible like local news partners. Some of it was stuff that's on like Auntie Pua or Havana's phone. Some of it was, going through Facebook and being like, who's that person that was there at that one day that got that one clip that Auntie Pua remembers or someone else remembers. So it was definitely a very long and collaborative process. And I think one guiding principle that Andy Pua said, which is, it's your art, but it's our life. And in the end, it was all of our art. But just honoring the fact that day to day, they're the people that are on screen, and they're the ones that, this is going to follow when they're in the grocery store or mailing something at the post office, and wanting to make sure and having a really clear commitment amongst myself and our whole film team that we want this to be something that is additive to the movement and to their lives, and not something that's going to make their lives harder or inhibit the movement or be a detriment to the movement. So that was a real North Star for us. And then also just thinking about these really tender and beautiful relationships, and wanting to show, like, wanting to visualize a feminine idea of what power looks like. And that, maybe we're more accustomed to like a masculinized version of power, which might be police, which might be weapons, but wanting to see being in community, ollieing or chanting together, dancing, singing, hugging each other, as versions of power also, and wanting to be able to show that. But it was like a year and a half, 2 year long process. And we worked very closely together. We also had a lot of different screenings with people that were on the front line, that were leadership of the movement, people that had never heard about Mauna Kea before, just to get different um, takes on how the film was landing with a bunch of different people. But our our primary goal was to make sure that this could be something that helps the movement. And so we did a lot of legal reviews and other things like that to make sure that there wouldn't be anything that would be used against them in court or otherwise.
Right. Yeah, that's a very important part of this. And Pooh, I was curious to hear your take on this question as well. And I love that line that Jalena just said about it's your art, but it's our life. How do you think this film fits into your life and your community?
Well, I would like to go back a little bit and talk about the editing process as well, because I think that in the audience, there are probably some of you that are maybe determining if you're in a movement and someone approaches you to say, can I document your life or your stance in this movement, and what that will mean when in your own way you are representing more than yourself, your family, you're showcasing what you're standing for. So to be honest, every single frame that is selected to be the final product of the film is very carefully gone over by my family, at least, and others who are in the film, so that we know we're accountable for every frame in the film. It's not the filmmaker who's going to be accountable in the end. I mean, they're accountable for certain things, but we're accountable for our part and the material and the traditions that we share, and everything comes back to us. So we have to be very sure when we're editing, when we're looking at it, how is it going to be accepted, embraced, perceived by our own people? Because this is going to be forever. And we don't want at the end to say, oh, we felt that in our na'au, in our gut, that it shouldn't have been in there, but we let it go. And then now that's the one thing that's coming back to impact the movement or our family or ourselves. And in the film, you see that, and this is just going to be a really personal insight here because we're not there. So we're trying to share as much as we can, knowing that we're not there in front of an audience that we can really have an exchange with. But there's a moment in the film when we come down where we're talking about that I got sick when we came down from the Mauna. And during the editing of the film, before we got to the final product that you see on the film, the final version, I watched the edit, and I had been getting better at that time, and I got the symptoms of being sick all over again because the film footage that we were at that time looking at selecting had brought all of that trauma back, and it just hit me everywhere where I had ever had a symptom. And it took me about 3 weeks to get past that. And what we felt at that time was that if that happened to me, that might happen to audience members who had been on frontline stances or who had gone through similar traumas. And we really looked at the film all over again and said, what is it that we want the audience to receive from this? And it's not to bring back a trauma so deeply that when you leave there, there's a reaction to it that is not positive. So yes, we share our challenges and our tragedies
Yes.
too. There's real tragedy in this film, as well as hope, as well as celebration, as well as victory. And we all need victory. And when one of us is victorious, then we all are, when we're all in this together. But it framed the way we went forward, knowing that this footage and this film really, when you're sitting in the audience, will be received in a certain way. And we all have frontline relatives that we have stood next to, and we know their illnesses and we know their traumas, whether they're from Standing Rock, whether they're from the Winnemem Wintu trying to bring the salmon back. We know what they go through. Let's do a film that was going to, in the end, uplift them. So I hope you can see that throughout the film. We could have put in a lot of footage that maybe would have ended up wounding more than healing. So
Yes.
that totally went into the decision making at the end. And so that's where, if you're making a film and you have these people you're featuring that are standing for something, as a filmmaker, you really have to release and say, yes, that can happen. Okay, this is great footage. This is a great moment, but we're going to take it out.
Yes.
And that's difficult to do. And it takes trust, and it takes going beyond being filmmakers and those featured in the film, but it really goes back to having relationships and knowing what will happen no matter which way you put this out.
Yeah, and for the filmmakers that might be in the audience, like it can feel really daunting. And I remember when Auntie Pua said she needs to love every frame of the film 100%, and I was like, "Oh my God, is that ever going to be possible? Is that ever going to happen?" But it did happen. And I think because we were so honest with each other in the process of editing the film, and of course also there's no like right answer. Like it's not like there's some set rules and then we're like, "Oh, of course this will work, this won't work." It's just a process of discovery and knowing that like both sides are allowed to change their mind. Like you might love something, but then it kind of sits with you in a strange way, or over time it's like maybe it actually isn't like the best. And so having that space, but because we went through such a honest and in-depth editing process, then now this past year, as we've released the film into the world and brought it to different audiences and brought it home to Hawaii and showed it to people that were on the Mauna, it's been such a peace of mind, I guess, and feels really good to be able to bring it into community, knowing that we had this like process, and not just with Auntie Pua, but with her family, with all the other women in the film, and with leadership of the movement as well, to make sure that people knew what was going to be said about the movement and about this time.
So I
Absolutely.
think I'm going to add one more thing
Please do.
on Jalena them's behalf. When there was footage that involved significant people with significant roles other than ourselves, like showing the ceremony of presenting the images on the roadway, the wooden images, that ceremony, we sent that footage to those who were facilitating that ceremony. So, and we did that for others as well. So it was really important for us to have not just permission, but approval. If you were saying something in the film and you were featured in it as well as us, that you would be able to watch that footage. So that added to the process, of course, but that's also necessary as well.
Yeah. And what Antigua had mentioned too, but with, there are tragic events that are shown in the film, and that was a long discussion too with Lena Alla, who's Kylie's mom, of like, do you want it to be included at all to begin with? And she really, really did. And then how can we do it in a way that honors her life and honors her mom and her whole family, and also isn't going to be I mean, of course it's very very shocking and tragic, so always there's a matter that it will be like very hard to digest, but also wanting to think about the audience too and have it in a way that can leave them not completely uh in a wreck as well.
Absolutely. And one of the moments that I found very sensitively handled, or it's, I guess, a whole sequence or the whole movie, but a lot of the interactions with police during the encampment and even when the elders are arrested, a lot of the way that that's shown is quite sensitive, I found, to um, the elders' experience, and it highlights their resistance more than any sort of police brutality or anything like that. I wondered if you could speak to that kind of philosophy and like why did you go with that kind of route? If you agree with my interpretation of your work.
Well, I think to set up that scene as well, what's really important to note as you're going through the progression there is that that one kupuna, Auntie Max, has that moment where she says, arrest the kupuna. She had made a statement previous to that, that in this particular stance, because these are not our first arrests, the first arrest occurred in, as you saw in the film, in 2015. It was her understanding and the understanding of the other elders there that no young ones be arrested this time. And it was more than that. It was about finally these elders, many of them who had not been given a voice when they were younger or not even known that they could resist and they could stand. They didn't even have that understanding. Finally, we're going to have that moment in this lifetime that they could pass down to the next generation of their own personal families that the elders had stood. And with them standing, they represented all of the elders of our Lahui, our native people, and our allies, but our native people, that we are strong and a brave people still, and that we would make this stand. So when that was determined, it's not as clear on the on in the footage, but I am on the microphone the entire time. And what's really beautiful about that moment in real time, being there on the roadway that day, was that every single time that there was an elder that was going to be arrested, I checked with them as to how they wanted their people to respond. Some of them wanted everyone to be silent, and that was very difficult. And they did not want any of us to interact. It was like, this is my moment. I am going to do this act of sacrifice and unselfishness in the strength and the power of our people, and I just want you to witness it. Or another might say, I want you to chant with me, or I want you to answer if I call out. So we adhered in reverence and respect, and it really laid the foundation for the rest of the time that we were on the mountain, how we were going to do this. And I had actually, in the film, you see briefly that I had met with the police right before that to say, this is what we're going to be doing today. And you are going to have to go home and explain this to your family around your kitchen table tonight and really think about what you're going to say, because this is going to be the legacy you leave for your next generations. And unlike, I don't want to compare this to any stance that is occurring in your homelands. I just watched the Yinta film, and I respect and honor those who stand and are dear to me. Our police are mostly our relatives, to be quite honest, and Kanaka. They are Hawaiian, and there is a way that is unspoken, that is set by our ancestors on how we're going to interact, that is even beyond us as a people. At the end of the day, we are still Native people, brothers and sisters. I mean, there were literally brothers and sisters on either side. And and you suffer through that. And even though we know we're going to make this stance for the sacred and for a mountain and for the next 7 generations, we also know it's difficult. But at the end of the day, you have to make a choice. So there's a manner of protocol that is still able to be the a manner in which we interact, at least on the mountain, because the police also understand that they are on sacred ground. They are in what we call the Vawakua, which is the place of our deities and the place of our ancestors, the place where you change your behavior because you are in the realm of the Ike Kupuna, the wisdom and the knowledge that is still passed down spiritually. So there's all of that that goes into standing here. It's not always that way in Hawaii, but on the mountain, it managed to be that way because I believe that the layer of the prayer and the ritual and the spirit world made sure of that.
Beautiful. Jalena, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it really well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Um, I think we have to start heading towards wrapping it up, but I did want to ask about one thing I very much appreciate about this film is the amount of time and focus spent on healing from trauma, and that that there is trauma inflicted by the state by all these forces. Can you speak a bit about your approach to trauma in your filmmaking, Jelena, and why do you think this is so important to document in films?
Mhm. Well, I think from the very beginning, when I approached Auntie Pua and asked her about making a film together, I wanted it to be about mothers and daughters, and then about the things that people don't understand or people don't get to see. And I think a lot of the before the prep and then what happens after are the things that people don't get to see. And originally we thought that the film was going to be the feature length version of the film because we made a short first, but we thought that the feature was going to be a lot about alliances and travel and how, when you see 7,000 people show up to protect a sacred mountain on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, how does that happen? And how are those alliances woven? And that's been a huge part of Antipua's life work, I would say, to build those connections. So originally, that's what I thought that the film was going to be a bit more about. And then in 2020, we thought it was going to be a big year of travel for us. And then it became clear March, April, May that it was not going to be the year of travel that we thought it was. And instead, I think the pandemic really, forced everyone into a place of stillness. And I think for a lot of people, that stillness kind of created the space for past traumas to come up to be healed. And I think it was the same for the Kiai and for the women that are in the film. And so I think it was just like our honor and privilege to have been working on this project for so long with them and to have built such strong relationships that we were able to be there to document that healing. And I think as a film team, we try to be like trauma informed in our filmmaking practices and in how we treat each other and understanding that, like urgency is a colonial concept. And so in creating films, like we want to try and embody these practices that we believe the film is about and not just have it be something that we speak about on Q&As and panels like this. So we wanted to really be present. And there are so many things that are not in the film that we were there for as people that we filmed. And I think that was a big learning lesson when it comes to, documenting trauma or doing things about trauma is that there's a lot of stuff that it will make sense for me and my team to be in the room for. And there's a lot of stuff that it might even make sense for us to be filming, but that doesn't mean that it makes sense for it to be in the actual film and be shown to the world. So being able to kind of understand those distinctions at each part of the process, I think was a really important part and something I would definitely recommend for anyone that's interested in doing this kind of documentation work around trauma and healing.
That's wonderful.
Also, I'm just going to add as well that what we wanted to show in the film was that healing is possible and that there are ways to do that culturally and spiritually, where yes, sometimes you have to go outside of your culture And, beyond that, to get help and counseling and all of those things are very necessary sometimes as well. But what you see at the end of the film is Havani looking at the manner in which we go through trauma and making a decision as this next generation that they're going to start to heal it in a way that we weren't able to. So to start to establish these circles of women to use our traditional manner of chanting or praying and our cultural ways and knowledge to begin to heal each other was really important. And the other thing I hope you see is a shift from the way that I'm standing, which is, never having a day off. And now it's been 15 years almost, never having a day off and going until you drop and then getting sick and picking yourself back up again. That's not unusual for women of my generation to do because there was a time when that was necessary, when there really were only 20 of us standing for something and you couldn't take a day off. And for some of us, that has just been our life's work to do it in this manner. But when you see Kapule say, I'm not going to do it the same way because she's watching me and she's knowing that one, it's not necessary anymore because, well, hopefully because there's so many more standing together and the alliances are stronger than ever. And we are making those connections for them so that our daughters are all working together and the nieces are all working together. And the men have their very pivotal place. And the sons of these men, these young warriors too. So what we're saying is hopefully this film has shown that there can be a shift because for the young ones coming up, it's going to be more important than ever to take care of their health first. And I think that they're seeing that by looking at the way that we're standing, that they're saying we're not going to do it in exactly the same way, but we're going to stand in a different way, perhaps, but just as strong, effective, and powerful as you are. And so, lastly, I think we just want to share that this is a tribute film. This might feature our families, but this is really about every single person who's standing. And when we made this film, we tried to include as many group photos as we could, as many stances as we could, and build and build and build on that so that people who are watching it will either say, I remember when that happened. I was there when that happened. I know what this is because they reached out to me and we gave support. This is everybody's film. This is for you and this is of you and this is with you. And that's our priority here and that's our purpose. So this is not just about us.
Yes, and Havane, Antipo's eldest daughter, has a great quote in the film, which is, "We don't just have to heal from this work; we can heal through it too." And so that kind of like duality, I think, really encompasses the film and what we hope to bring out into the world. That, standing and being part of your community is something that is really healing. And yes, there are things that you need to heal from as well, but it's a beautiful healing experience and can bring you into sisterhood, siblinghood, community that makes you stronger. And we also just wanted to say that there's a petition, a change.org petition to stop the 30-meter telescope, and we're a few thousand shy of reaching 500,000 signatures, which we really hope to get to. So if everyone in the audience and watching online doesn't mind taking out their phones and looking up Stop TMT on change.org, we would really appreciate a petition sign. And you can follow the movement at Protect Mauna Kea on Instagram and the film at Standing Above the Clouds. And yeah, please feel free to reach out with us and reach out to us and share your thoughts. We love hearing how the film has landed for people.
And you can request the film as well on Standing Above the Clouds. Just go to their bio, and we're happy to either, if we can be there, we will be, and if we can't, we're happy to do a virtual Q&A because the most important thing is to keep our stances, what we stand for, what we cherish and hold dear, visible and present. Because if we're not, it's as if we disappeared, and we're not going anywhere. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Auntie Pua and Jalena Keane-Lee. Thank you so much for sharing your film and for being with us today. We so appreciate all your thoughts on this. This is a beautiful film and we're privileged to have seen it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us and for hosting this wonderful film festival.
Aloha, everybody.